Good morning, line team. Hope everybody's doing well today. It's a wonderful blue sky day here in South Carolina. We're in March and it's feeling a little bit like springtime. In fact, you may hear some birds from now and then in this presentation, letting you know it is springtime. But just a quick update, Miss Pam Tompkins with Set Solutions, CEO and President of Set Solutions, she's going to be sharing today. If you don't have her presentation from 2023, I highly recommend that you get it. And it's going to be about the heavyweight champion is the employee in charge. Wonderful. And today she's going to be talking about electric power safety standards, the why and the how behind that. So that's exciting, and it's going to be another power punch from Miss Pamela. And real quick, ECAUS, we have 12,000 plus members now in just 2 years. This is going on our 3rd year this month. And Mr. Danny Rains, he started off at 002, and guess what? Mr. Danny Rains comes back tomorrow. So that's going to be exciting to see him again. We also started ECAUS Live Wire podcast, and Mr. William Martin has been on that. He was 001, and yesterday Mr. Lido Wilkins, he was on, and you'll be getting that. Go to electriccultureofsafety.com, and we will have all those public. We're going to have shorts. We're going to have the full lengths on electriccultureofsafety.com. Contact me anytime. You can contact me at SafetyTraining at Bierer meters, and I'll get you signed up, get you all the webinars. What else? Make sure I get everything here. I think that's it. So hope you all have fun and enjoy. And Miss Pam, her company, they do safety, they do training, they do organizational consultant for companies and all around the country. And known her for a few years, and a wonderful lady with about 40 plus years of line experience. So she's a line legend. And I just called her that earlier before this, so enjoy.
Not sure about that, for sure. But how wonderful it is to come and be a part of this organization. And thank you for those of you that are online and going to be watching this in the future. You know, everything we do is about helping our industry and giving back to our industry. And I'm a firm believer that we've all got to do that to be strong. Now, you know, I've got a presentation today that's going to be on standards, and everybody's like, wow, standards. I am hoping to definitely give you some good understanding when we talk about this world of standards. You know, I've been around a long time, and for years we just used to say, well, what is the standard? What is the rule for this? Let's really break it down and really look at the first thing is, well, why do we even need this? Why do we even want to talk about a standard? And then how do we actually apply these standards? You know, it's so important to think about why do we need it, but the application is one of the most important pieces. And honestly, I see that missing a lot. I see a rule out there and a lot of things happen that people don't know how to apply them. So I'm going to get started and kind of get you thinking through this process. So when I say this, I've got a slide up, and I really want you to kind of key into this today. I want to talk about this. In your safety manual, if you pulled your safety manual out today, you picked it up and you looked at it, can you pull out a rule? And I'm just going to give you a couple rules, like minimum approach distance. I'm going to give you that. I want to get you thinking about that. And also temporary protective grounding. So is your rule in your safety manual, does it just say exactly what the OSHA standard says? Okay, if it does, I want you to think through this. can you, and on the screen it says this, the first thing you can read it, certainly everybody can read that, but can you actually interpret what it's saying to you, and do you know how to apply it? I will just tell you, all the years that I've been in the industry, I pick up so many safety manuals that says the exact same thing as the OSHA standard says, and very few people in our industry today can even tell you what that OSHA standard said, and also how to apply it. And so that's where I see a failure mode so many times, because just because the OSHA standard, like in temporary protective grounding, it will tell you that you've got to have an equipotential zone. And what we're going to see is the standard didn't tell you how to do it. It didn't give you the information on it. If you're stating it in your safety manual, you've got to have an equipotential zone, then people need to understand how to apply that. And so I think everything that we look at when we look at the standards rule is, you really, when you're just pointing at something and saying, OSHA, tell me in the OSHA standard where it shows me that, I want you to really think through that. And in this presentation, hopefully I'm going to give you some tools to think about, some ways that maybe you've not thought about before that can help you with this. So I want to start out with this concept. So let's talk about when we look at the bare bone basics of what safety looks like, I want to make sure I key into that very well. If you've not ever seen this slide is such an important slide. It can tell you what the look of safety is. And the look of safety is sometimes so different than what we have heard through the years that safety actually looks like. So let's look at this. At the very bottom line, you see something that is a very dark black line. Well, I'm just going to tell you that's the danger line. So when you think safety, there's always danger. Safety on one end of it, as you can see, and danger on the other end. Now, the thing that there is, and we have to think through this process, is this. The reason we have danger is there are hazards and threats everywhere. Just because we have a hazard and a threat does not mean we're going to get hurt. And I want to talk more through that in just a few minutes. But we really have to think about this. These hazards and threats, there is a probability that something could happen. It doesn't mean that it is, but there is a probability. Now, on the opposite end of this danger is what I call, and I honestly want to get everybody thinking through this process, I call this the green line. And you'll see my arrow here whenever I talk about this. So the green line is everything in reality that we do in the safety world to be safe. So the green line are all the rules, the standards, all of the things we do, safety meetings, all of those things. Now, I will say this, and this is where I think a lot of times all of us really don't get a good understanding of. To me, there are two green lines. I'm going to talk about the first green line to start with, your organization. So your organization has to have that green line. That is, the organization that you work for has to basically say up here, hey, I'm going to have these standards put in place. I'm going to have this because I know I've got these hazards and threats down here. So I'm going to put these standards in place to protect my folks from these hazards and threats that are going to be happening in this industry. I think that's a great thing, but I want to challenge everybody on the line today to think beyond that. I'm going to challenge you to figure out where your green line is. Because not only the organization needs a green line, you personally need a green line. I need a green line. I have to know where my standard is. What am I not going to veer from? And that, I think, in our industry is something that you've got to hold near and dear. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I know I'm not going to do this or I'm not going to do that. Honestly, all of us will do all kinds of things in our life that we never thought that we would do. That's why it's so important to keep in mind the concept of what a green line is, what the green line looks like for you personally. And so I'll talk more through this presentation of how to ensure that you're maintaining your green line. And I like it. If you walk up to somebody that's working with you and basically say, what's your green line look like today? Your green line today should look like, hopefully, it's very strong. Your green line probably should be stronger than what your organization's green line is. So holding each other accountable to have really strong green lines to me is extremely important. All right, so let's look what else we have here. Now, the reason that we want to have a strong green line is, I don't have to tell anybody on this line today why you need a strong green line. It's all about this concept of high-risk work. Now, people talk about risk all the time, and I want to make sure I break it down for you very easily. In the risk world, I like to make it simple. Two major things in the risk world. That is, what is the probability that this hazard and threat over here is going to cause damage to me? What's the probability? But the second piece that we really have to think about, probability could be high or probability could be low. The second piece we have to key into is, if it does happen, how bad is it going to be? What's the severity of this? In the world you live in, as I told you, I don't have to tell you this, there is nobody that you probably go to dinner with, that you go to church with, you go to other places with, that would even consider being up into an aerial device like some of these pictures, you know, gloving 25 kV. They'll look at you and go, are you crazy? There's no way I would do that. It's all about risk. So they see risk differently than a lot of folks do in our industry. Honestly, what I'm asking you today is to consider every single day when you're thinking about your green line, I'm asking you to consider, what is the worst thing that could happen to me today, and do I have my green line where it needs to be? Do I have the standards? Do I have my work practices where they need to be? Am I out there as my brother's keeper, and am I making sure everybody else's green line is where it needs to be? It's such an important piece for us as we move through. Now, why am I standing here talking to you about this? You know, I'm consultant, been in the consulting business for 24 years, and unfortunately, through these years, we have seen some horrific things happen. And I've also seen some things, and not too long ago, I was in a meeting with the CEO of a company, and they invited our company in before something happened. So to me, that's the good thing, trying to figure out where their green line is, other than us coming in after the fact and finding out the green line is so far down. In fact, the green line's sitting on top of the black line. That's a tough day. It's happening in our industry, and sometimes that green line gets all the way down. On that last slide, it showed where they connect, but I always say too, it just falls right down. It falls right down on top of the black line a lot of times. We would not be having these catastrophic events occurring if not. And honestly, our industry is still dealing with the two major things, and I called on them earlier: minimum approach distances and not understanding insulate-isolate programs. Trying to go back to the OSHA standard and say, oh, well, what does OSHA say? Let me just basically say this. OSHA, if I had to give them a grade, they are a D or an F student, all right? They're not going to keep you safe. The rules that you read there is not going to keep you safe. So you've got to be an A+ student up here on the green line to move forward in this industry. All right, so when we talk about this, I want to make sure we key into this, because we've got hazards and threats that we saw on our slide early on. So what's the things that are going to take us out? So a lot of times when you are planning your jobs, you are planning, and in a job briefing, you've got to look at all the different hazards, right? You've got to look at, my gosh, everything around you is hazards and threats. I started out with that. So what I want you to key into is risk. What's the things that are going to take me out today, right, to build my green line? And I really want you talking about these two major electrical hazards, because we wouldn't have the electric power standards. We wouldn't even be talking about standards in our industry if we didn't have these two areas. The ones that are going to take you out: step and touch potentials. And I'll tell you how many times in organizations do I ask folks, well, let's talk about what kind of hazards. If you're going to look at hazards on the job site, what kind of hazards do you look at? And a lot of times folks will just basically say, well, you know, we've got all kinds of things. We've got slips, trips, and falls. We do, and people die because of them. I do know this. But we have electrical hazards is something that I hear. Okay, you have electrical hazards. What are the electrical hazards? And what kind of green line do you have to ensure that the electrical hazard doesn't occur? Now, down at the bottom of this slide, you're going to see the three. Once again, I try to make things very simple for folks. The look of safety is really this. I've got a hazard out there. I've got to figure out what the risk is. You know, what's going to happen to me? What's the worst thing that's going to happen with us? And I've got to figure out what my risk tolerance is. Not only me, but my family's risk tolerance. All right, so if I do this, is this going to be something that my family, me, on my green line, that I'm going to feel good about? I think that we always have to come back to that. And then it takes me to the third piece of this. All right, if I say, my green line needs to be way up here, then I've got to figure out how I'm going to control these effectively to ensure that I've got a high green line. And that's step and touch potentials major. So there goes your insulate-isolate programs. Ensuring that we have got arc flash taken care of. And just recently, our company, as we're working with, I can't even name the number of companies right now in the arc flash world. Arc flash is something that's tough to get a handle on. And trying to better understand the arc flash world and the way that folks work in our world, that we have to change work processes. We have to get our green line up here. Because it does happen. We have seen serious burns over the last couple years with folks. And so looking at these particular hazards, ensuring that we're doing what we need to do to get our green line, our controls up. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about this concept of, well, how do you make a green line? How do you know that your organization has a good, strong green line? So I started out the presentation talking about this. OSHA is regulatory, it's the law, and you have to be there. So if you, in your safety manual, I said early, just says exactly what the OSHA standard said. We already said it doesn't tell us how to do anything. It tells us the end result of what's expected. It didn't tell you how to do that. So this is the slide that I want to help you with to better understand, how do I know what the green line looks like? The green line has changed, what I consider changed, over the last 10 years, because I've been in it for a long time. 20 years ago, we weren't even talking about a green line. We were just talking about, well, what did OSHA tell us? You know, we're trying to figure all this stuff out. We've got so much more to deal with now, not to deal with, that can help us be successful in today's world. So OSHA just basically tells you how to get there. Let's look at the next piece of this. Once again, you have to always key into this. When I'm figuring out what my green line is, the OSHA law tells me something, it's about a hazard. So I've got to figure out what the hazards are that, you know, OSHA is talking about. That's the major problem that we have, that we don't try to figure it out. So here's what I would tell you. If you want to know what OSHA says, and you walk up to somebody and say, just tell me what OSHA says, I would challenge you to always come back and say, well, let's identify what the hazard is first before we read the OSHA law. Why are we even talking about this? What's the hazard? And get your hands around that. And then you can go into the second pieces of identifying what the risk is, how bad is it going to be today, and then the third thing is how you're going to control it, what you're going to do. And that control basically looks like this. The control looks like a situation of something called the hierarchy of controls. And if you've never seen this slide, I'm going to ask you to do your homework. So controls start with elimination and go down to PPE, and PPE being the very last line of control. Now, how do I figure out how to make these controls work? I make these controls work by listening to the industry. What's the industry telling me? If I learned something 10 years ago or longer, then I probably need to be listening to what the industry says, because they're going to help you figure out where your green line is. Now, what am I talking about? You see a slide here that basically says consensus standards. So a consensus standard is a group of people across the United States that come together to try to figure out, okay, we know we have this hazard, then what are the standards, what are the work rules we're going to put in place to ensure we have this strong green line? So like in the temporary protective grounding world, if I'm trying to build out, OSHA's telling me I got to have an equipotential zone, then I'm going to go to the IEEE 1048, and I'm going to pull that up along with some other IEEE standards, which IEEE is the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. And they're a group of folks that come in and talk about, okay, what is the industry going to do? What is the green line up here? How is it going to really work really well in our industry? Because, you know, the hazard, even though the hazard we know, step and touch potentials, all the things, the way that we design systems in today's world, the way that we have automation in today's world is not the same. So we have to go back and look at these consensus standards to make sure that we're there. Now, I've got one other piece that's going to help you build your green line. And that last piece is this. All right, what's the best practice? What's your neighboring utility doing? What is the utility that's further out doing? And or what are the contractors doing? What are other folks in our industry doing? So I'd say don't have your head in the sand on this. I'm saying it nicely. Try to figure out what other folks are doing. Network. Figure out, and that's why this particular group is so wonderful, that you get an opportunity just to network with a lot of different folks. Ask questions. Listen to these programs. Try to find out more information. Now, there's also another area in the industry best practices. The contractor groups in the United States, the large utilities, the co-ops and the municipals too, have all come together, and they went to OSHA and basically said, we want to build out what is the minimum best practice for utilities, and it's the ET&D partnership. So you can go out on the website, you can just Google it, get information about it. It can help you with your insulate, isolate programs. It can help you with your temporary protected grounding. It can help you even build your job briefings better to get your green line up. Make sure you have a strong green line. So I would urge everybody on this line to go out and try to figure out what's the industry doing. Once again, don't have your head in the sand. As a consultant, a lot of times I get an opportunity to hear, well, you know, we've not had anything happen serious at our company before, so we must be doing a lot of things good. And honestly, you could be. You could be doing a lot of things good. But you also could have your green line way down, getting very close down to the danger line, and just never really know it. It's almost like a time bomb getting ready to go off. Sometimes in the industry, or sometimes in safety in general, we are very lucky. And we can be lucky for years and years and years and years. That's why I would also tell you the importance of assessing your green line. The organization assessing your green line, is it where it needs to be? And also you personally assessing. And honestly, I would tell you to sit down and talk with your family about it. Try to bring your family into this to figure out exactly where your green line should be and what it might look like for you. I know that a lot of times I kind of preach the gospel with this, but I really want to key into a few things. So the electric power standard, if you go in and you look at what OSHA's got, there's a lot of information in there. I mean, it goes in the general industry side from A all the way to X. And that's a lot of stuff in there. The things that we see as consultants that take folks out in our industry are these 5 things. Now, there's a lot more out there, and please don't just take it home that Pam said, this is it, because that is not true. But if you have very strong green lines on these 5 areas, and you know personally you are not going to be below your personal green line, that is in the application of this. The application means, when do people need to be trained? When do I need to have the right type of training? If I hire people to come into my organization, what does it look like? If I have a young groundman that just walked in on the crew and he's brand new, what do I need to be talking about? And I'll tell you, the application is figuring out where the hazards are, where step and touch potential hazards are. So how do you apply all of this stuff to brand new people that just walked on your crew or your organization? How do you apply that? You have to figure out exactly who's coming in to apply it. Job briefing is the next one. OSHA basically talks about it, and they tell us it's all about planning the job. So there is, and take this one home, there is not one single scenario, and I'll use the word scenario, let's just talk about either fatality or very serious injury, which we call a SIF, that our organization has been asked to help with over the years, in the 24 years, where we have seen that the job briefing was effective. So what we see is this. The green line is way down here. It's an operational briefing. You go here, you do this, you do that. And our industry has been founded on that. Let's get the job done. The only reason that OSHA would talk about a job briefing is because we've got hazards and threats out there. And so the job briefing has to be founded on the task-specific hazards and threats that are going to take people out. And honestly, I can walk into, anybody in our organization can walk into a company and tell you within 5 minutes, if we hear a job briefing, what the organizational culture looks like inside your company. Whether you believe in that, whether you believe it brings your green line up or not. So I urge you, build an effective process where people are on board thinking about the things in the job briefing world. Minimum approach distance, insulate, isolate programs. If you read the OSHA standard, your green line is going to be way down here because it just tells you basic bare bone things like minimum approach distance. Keep in mind, minimum approach distance is all about air insulation values. So air becomes your insulator. Whenever you cross in and you break that and you take away that insulation value, you're changing the integrity of everything on that job site. My next one is taking equipment, lines and equipment out of service. In the OSHA law, they call it de-energizing lines and equipment for employee protection. But honestly, you know, you can call it what you want to call it. I hear people call it lockout, tag out. I hear people call it switching and tagging, clearance programs, a lot of different things. At the end of the day, just make sure it does what it needs to do. Don't get so caught up on the wording that you're not up here figuring out what the safe work practice is for the hazard that's out there. Is the green line where it needs to be? And then, of course, grounding. I've already talked a good bit about the grounding piece of it. But grounding plays such an important piece in our lives. 20 years ago in this industry, and some of you are very young in the industry, and you would think 20 years ago is a long time ago. It's not that long in this industry ago. We were not talking about how to effectively look at minimizing the amount of current flow through the human body and grounding protocols. Danny Raines, if you've not had a chance, him and Jim Vaughn do a great job in the grounding world to go out and key into it to try to figure out exactly where we're at in the grounding world. If you've not looked at grounding practices in the last 5 years, 10 years, then I would tell you to go out and look at that. Get your green line up. Do what you need to do on that side of the house. Because it is not going to be effective in the way that our systems are built in today's world. And so I kind of get, and I want to take this back, I want to put it into a real world practice. So I've got a transmission line out here, and I've got maybe people that are going to be either contractors coming in working for me. I might be the utility, or I might be the contractor that's out there building this parallel line. So, in lots of times in our industry as consultants, people will say, okay, well, tell me when I have to have training. Who has to be trained on this job site? What type of training do I have to have? What kind of job briefing do I have to have? What type of temporary protective grounds do I need to have? What are all the things that go along with this? You know, I want to make sure I'm in compliance with OSHA. Always come back to the bare bone basics. What's the worst thing that's going to happen to my people out there? Everybody. What is the hazard? And keep in mind, not every single person on these job sites are going to be exposed to the exact same hazards. They might have somewhat of the same hazard, but it's not the exact same process that's going to get them there. So if I've got a ground worker or I've got somebody that's operating a piece of equipment, I have to think about it. If I'm going to build a strong green line, I have to think about the work they're doing. and I have to think about the hazard for the work they're doing, then I have to go out and I have to figure out, all right, what's the worst thing's going to happen to them today? And do I have an effective control, which is my green line up here, for that work that they're doing today? It's so important to always think that way. If I always think that way, I'm going to be successful. I'm going to get my own green line up, and I'm going to have my organizational green line up instead of me saying, well, let's go back to the standard, try to figure it out. Utilize the standard. Utilize all of the industry best practices that are out there, and then utilize this right here, right? Utilize this. And also, I will tell you to utilize beyond just this, because a lot of times our brain, we may have learned something that we learned 5, 10 years ago, and the industry has changed. So, you know, Google is your friend sometimes. And not everything that you're going to find out when you Google something is 100% correct. I know this. But at least get out and do research on it. This is your industry. This is your life. Don't get so bogged down that you think that, hey, you know all this stuff. Because I'm constantly reading, constantly trying to figure out what's happening with the industry and where it's moving, and how we all can stay abreast to help people better understand the hazards that are out there. It's so important. And so that brings me back to where kind of I started with, the bare bone basics of this, the green line. You've got to set that standard. If you're an organization, you're a safety facilitator, you're a senior leader in your organization, it is such an important thing that you set your green line high. You want it as high for your organization as possible. If you're a contractor, you're a small contractor, and you're working for a utility, and your utility's basically keeping you at this green line, you may want your green line higher than what the utility's requiring. And I would hope that you would say, yes, we're going to be up here. We're going to be more than just what the minimum or the bare standard is. And so I would challenge you as you kind of move through this world to just come up with this. And like I say, stay connected, be a part of the organization, go back and listen to a lot of the presentations in this area, and gather information. Be smart about it. And I know you are, because this is a great industry. It's an industry that is growing. We've got a lot of young folks coming into the industry, which I told someone yesterday how exciting that is, because once, you know, I was young a long time ago and we experienced the exact same thing. So I'll just tell you guys that. All of you that are young out there, we felt the same way you did years ago. So I love to tell people that. I said it's so exciting. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you very much.